Anne Bonny and Mary Read are legendary pirates. But how much of that is legend and how much truth? Well, the truth is they were tried in a naval courtroom where the very statutes were drafted by men who called female piracy unnatural. So let's just say their odds were not good. In the 17th and 18th centuries, during what was called the Golden Age of piracy, British Admiralty tribunals showed little mercy to those accused of robbing on the high seas, and even less to women who, in the eyes of the court, had broken not only imperial law but the order of gender itself. These were bench trials, not jury trials. The verdicts moved fast. The show was for everyone to see. The conclusion was almost always the same. The testimony flowed from the captains and lieutenants, from sailors who trembled as they spoke, terrified that a word too soft might stain them with suspicion. The accused entered with few rights and fewer allies, but two names haunt the dock: Anne Bonny and Mary Read. In 1720, they stood together in Spanish Town, Jamaica, young, defiant, already half legend. When the clerk read the verdict, they heard the words that everyone already knew: guilty. To understand these courts, you have to see the theater. You have to see the bench draped in authority, the clerk scratching with iron gall ink, the naval officers stiff with ceremony, the accused standing without counsel, the gallery whispering. The Thames moved with its usual silence, but near Wapping the air broke with cries. Londoners pressed against one another, necks craning to see. At Execution Dock, pirates met their end, their bodies swaying above the murky tide. Here the Empire staged its warnings, and women, rare though they were, among the condemned, found no exemption. The gallows jutted out above the water as if to remind every sailor that the very element which once gave them freedom would also bear witness to their death. Under British maritime law, piracy was a capital crime, its punishment spelled out without ambiguity in the Piracy Act of 1698. All and every person so offending, the statute read, shall suffer pains of death. Admiralty justice was not meant to be merciful, it was meant to be final. Unlike executions on land, these hangings belonged to the sea, and the sight itself told the story. The tide that had carried a ship to fortune would now rise beneath a dangling corpse. The journey to the gallows was itself a spectacle. Condemned pirates were marched from Newgate prison, paraded through the streets in a cart, guarded and jeered in equal measure. Crowds gathered at windows and corners. Children scampered alongside, shouting insults taught by their elders. At Wapping the noose awaited. The mechanics were simple but cruel. The drop was short, designed not to break the neck, but to choke the life slowly away. The condemned writhed and kicked in what sailors came to call the marshal's dance, a grotesque theater of strangulation that played out until the body went still. Before the rope came the lash. Flogging was one of the oldest tools of naval discipline, and in the colonies it became a theater of its own. To flog a pirate was to strip them before the crowd, to carve pain into skin as a message that traveled further than any decree. For female captives, the punishment carried an added weight. The whip of choice was the cat-o'-nine-tails, a bundle of knotted cords that tore with every stroke. Sentences varied, sometimes a dozen lashes, sometimes 100, but the effect was always the same. Flesh split, blood ran, and silence turned into screams. The punishment was rarely hidden. It was carried out in open spaces, on docks, outside prison gates, in town squares, where crowds gathered in anticipation. Women and children stood among the onlookers, learning through sight what words could not teach. Authorities knew flogging broke more than skin, it broke spirit. Confessions spilled easier after lashes. Defiance turned to compliance when each breath carried the sting of salt air against raw wounds. Flogging of women carried a double meaning. For men, the lash was discipline. For women, it was degradation. To see a woman tied and whipped in public was to reinforce the belief that piracy was not only rebellion against empire, but rebellion against nature itself. The Caribbean, 1720. A ship has just pulled into port, its hold filled with riches from a Spanish galleon captured off the coast of Panama. Among the treasures, there are also prisoners. Not every captured woman was marched to the gallows or broken by the whip. Some vanished into fates less visible but no less cruel. In the ports of the Caribbean, West Africa, and the Americas, colonial authorities sometimes chose a different sentence: concubinage, servitude, or outright slavery. Race, class, and nationality shaped these fates. White European women sometimes found themselves spared execution, absorbed instead into the households of colonial officials or merchants as coerced companions. Women of color, particularly those already assumed to be enslaved, were almost never afforded such ambiguous mercy. They disappeared into plantations, kitchens, or brothels, their identities consumed by labor and exploitation. In the Spanish and Portuguese colonies, where the lines between piracy and privateering often blurred, women seized on captured ships, especially those of African or indigenous descent, were frequently sold as spoils. The ledger would note them not as sailors or fighters, but as property, indistinguishable from other captives taken in raids. A woman who had once wielded a cutlass or loaded cannon could be marched ashore and sold to work in fields or households, her story erased before it could be told. Archival fragments from Cartagena and Portobello in the late 17th century describe women processed as spoils of war after pirate vessels were seized. Whether they had been crew or captive mattered little. The empire did not distinguish. What mattered was control, reasserting it by redistributing lives as property. In these transactions, female pirates were not remembered as rebels. They were absorbed into the machinery of empire, their defiance scrubbed away. For many, this fate was worse than death. Execution ended a life swiftly. These other punishments erased identity slowly, stretching out across years in kitchens where names were forgotten, in fields where memories of the sea faded with each season. The whip still marked them, but now it came not from a sentence passed in court, but from overseers enforcing daily toil. The erasure was deliberate. A hanged pirate left a body that reminded others of rebellion. A flogged pirate left scars that testified to defiance, but a woman folded into servitude left nothing. She became invisible, her story dissolved into silence. The empire feared not only her crimes but her memory, and by removing her from the record, it achieved the ultimate punishment. Forgetting, for historians, these women hover at the edges of archives, their lives reduced to hints and shadows, a line in a ledger, a name misspelled, an anonymous figure listed among the spoils. We know they existed because absence itself testifies. Too many women boarded ships for none to have survived capture. Yet where the rope or the lash preserved memory through violence, servitude erased it. These women did not die as pirates, they lived as ghosts in lives not their own. Hi everyone. For some women, the end did not come at the gallows or in the marketplace. It came slowly, invisibly, aboard the hulks of prison ships. These vessels, stripped of sails and moored in harbors, were never meant to hold human lives. Yet in the 18th century, when jails overflowed and colonies swelled with captives, they became floating dungeons. Pirates, rebels, and those deemed enemies of the crown were chained below their decks, and among them, sometimes were women. Conditions were nightmarish. The air below deck was damp, heavy, and foul. Chains rattled in the darkness, irons biting into flesh. Disease spread in silence. Typhus, dysentery, smallpox. Food was scarce, often spoiled, and water turned brackish in casks. Prisoners lived shoulder to shoulder in spaces too narrow to lie down. In such confinement, death became routine. For men, the records name numbers, tallies of lives lost. For women, the record is often blank. Their existence was rarely acknowledged, and their deaths folded into silence. Yet absence speaks. The British Navy anchored these hulks in places like Portsmouth, Plymouth, and Kingston. Testimony from surviving male prisoners describes the horror. Days without light, guards indifferent to suffering, corpses dragged up through hatches only when the stench became unbearable. If men endured this, there is no reason to believe women fared better. In truth, they were doubly vulnerable. Starvation and disease claimed lives indiscriminately, but exploitation fell heavily on women. Abuse by guards or sailors was whispered of, rarely written down, but the silence itself testifies to what the ink refused to mark. Unlike the gallows, prison ships offered no spectacle. There were no crowds, no sermons, no public lessons. The cruelty here was not in performance, but in neglect. Death arrived slowly, sometimes in days, sometimes in months, until bodies wasted away in the shadows of the hold. The empire did not need to stage these deaths. Forgetting them was punishment enough, and so for many women accused of piracy, disappearance was their sentence. They did not leave behind ballads or transcripts, only silence. Their names fell away from ledgers, their faces blurred from memory. They were punished not with the rope, the lash, or even slavery, but with erasure. History remembers Anne Bonny and Mary Read because legend clung to them. It forgets countless others because forgetting was the point. The fate of female pirates was never uniform. Some were executed in public, their deaths twisted into warnings. Some were flogged until flesh split, their agony turned into lessons. Some were absorbed into servitude, their identities stripped away. Some withered unseen in the holds of rotting ships. Each fate different, yet bound by a single truth. The empire feared women who defied it, and so it punished them with rope, with whip, with silence. What remains today are fragments, a phrase in a trial transcript, a name half legible in a ledger, a rumor of defiance, and through these fragments, a chilling truth emerges. The story of piracy is not only about the men who fought and died, but also about the women whose fates were deliberately forgotten. Their silence was not accident, it was design, and in that silence, the power of empire still echoes. Thank you for listening.